A former Buckeye teacher has been arrested for sex crimes involving a student. Police say 42-year-old Jessica Kramer was a teacher at Odyssey Institute for Advanced and International Studies. Detectives say Kramer had a sexual relationship with a 17-year-old student that started around August 2022. School officials reportedly learned about the relationship in April of this year and reported it to police. Kramer was arrested at her Buckeye home this morning and booked into the Maricopa County Jail.
A former teacher in Buckeye under arrest today, accused of sex crimes involving a student. She taught at Odyssey Institute for Advanced and International Studies. Police say after a months-long investigation, they arrested this woman, 42-year-old Jessica Kramer. She's facing criminal charges for an inappropriate sexual relationship she reportedly had with a 17-year-old male student.
Tonight, Buckeye police arrested a former teacher accused of sex crimes against a student. According to authorities, 42-year-old Jessica Kramer sexually abused a student while teaching at the Odyssey Institute for Advanced and International Studies. That abuse reportedly began in August of 2022.
Jessica Kramer, born in Illinois, aged 42, was arrested and charged for alleged sexual relationship with a minor. For clarification, my use of the word alleged during this video is simply to protect myself from legal repercussions for what's discussed in this video and not to take away from the severity of the situation whatsoever. A quick disclaimer: this is my mother, and while I am aiming to be as factual as possible to allow you, the audience, to come to whatever conclusion you deem likely, I am not claiming to be completely unbiased, as I am presenting a large amount of this information from my own perspective and experience with Jessica K. Jessica K gave birth to me in March of 1999. In 2001, approximately 2 years later, I was removed from her care due to child abuse and child neglect as deemed by the court in Rock Island, while I stayed in the care of my grandmother for a number of years following this. Jessica K remarried, adopting 2 children her husband had from a previous marriage. Around 2008 or 2009, the exact timeline here is a bit fuzzy, I was returned to Jessica K's care. As far back as my memory goes, my mother constantly was involved or around other children, whether it be through substitute teaching, volunteering with my sister's cheerleading, and other extracurriculars. And during the earlier years, when she was involved with kids, I recall a number of kids expressing discomfort with the way Jessica K treated them, from screaming to name-calling them and demeaning them. It was obvious to me from a young age that she was not fond of children, despite having a total of 5 presently. At her most recent job as a teacher, there were complaints filed against her with the school she worked at for allegedly Snapchatting a boy, where the messages cannot be recovered simply due to how Snapchat's messaging system works. This being something that is taboo, with the assumed intention being to keep a professional relationship between student and teacher, acting as a safeguard for both. Additionally, she had complaints for mistreating one of her co-workers' children, apparently not realizing the child's parents worked at the school. Following her arrest, she was fired from working at the school. She also has continually hosted foreign exchange students at her home for multiple years, several of which felt uncomfortable enough living there within just a short period of time and asked to be transferred to a separate home. For reference, the foreign exchange students were paying to come stay in the US for the entirety of the school year, which they would ideally spend at the same home, as opposed to switching around midway through. Others have decided to no longer have contact with her whatsoever due to their experiences living in her home. While living with Jessica K, I slowly realized she treated children, whether hers or other people's, as her slaves. From screaming at children to do all of the cleaning, to belittling them as never doing a good job, to blaming her own messes on them, which of course meant they were responsible for picking them up, i.e. cleaning her room for her, which was always a complete mess, and was the responsibility of her children to clean up on her behalf. To my understanding, she currently has over 10 animals at present, and they are not properly taken care of. Her cat's litter box is scarcely cleaned out, and as shown from the photos, her dogs poop everywhere in the house due to lack of training and not being let out enough. These photos were taken after her slaves, children, no longer occupy her home. The relevancy here is that the animals were always the children's responsibility as well, meaning it's not very surprising that they have not been taken care of since her children are no longer in her care. Jessica K's involvement in pet care was in the minority when I lived with her. Unfortunately, the dogs were forced to spend most of their lives in a cage until they used the restroom and were more often than not swiftly sent back, with blankets covering their cage for large amounts of the day. When it came to making sure her kids were fed, this task also fell on the shoulders of her children, namely the oldest until the others were old enough to fend for themselves. Along with making sure her kids woke up for school, this too fell on the oldest, as well as making sure that Jessica K was woken up for work, a long task in and of itself. In Jessica K's home, she liked to use, in her words, fluffy racial slurs to describe people of other races, making people I brought home uncomfortable with her language as it pertained to race, as well as the comfortability to which she would say it, whether she was talking about the blacks or her beaners. I recall an instance where she told me I was not allowed to date black or Muslim women whatsoever. This conversation was not provoked. I had not brought up dating women of any specific race or dating them, period. However, she took it upon herself to make sure I understood the boundaries to which my dating profile would be. They say it's not about what you know, it's about who you know. It seemed like Jessica K always found a way to know the right people. For a long period of time, Jessica K just so happened to be friends with people who had power over her, that seemed to act as a shield for her. An example of this is when complaints were initially made against her with the company that handles the foreign exchange students. They were swatted away with no recourse whatsoever. She continued to host foreign children for years after this. Another example I recall was being woken up early in the morning and being told we needed to clean now because CPS was on their way. How does someone know CPS is coming to your house unless someone they know works there and tips them off? When I was young and still in the care of Jessica K, I told her I believed she was a psychopath. I now would like to amend that statement. After much more research into psychopathy, sociopathy, and narcissism, I've come to the conclusion she's not a psychopath, but likely is instead a malignant narcissist. Whenever having a discussion with her, the responses received were often shallow in substance, with the underlying goal of hers being to switch the conversation either to herself, or if in an argument, then the goal being to convince others how right she was. Whether she was telling blanket lies to do this, or conflating the actual evidence and information she was giving to win the conversations, this was something very difficult to deal with as a child. There is little recourse in this sort of a relationship, particularly when they have power over you, such as a parent-to-child relationship. When the lying didn't work, she would then either switch to manipulation through attempting to force feelings of guilt in the other person, or intimidation through screaming, yelling, or even threatening. Something that was not exclusive for her own children whatsoever. To close, I did speak with the minor in question who made these allegations towards Jessica K. And while seeming credible, they did confirm that there was sexual conduct that went on with her. Adding on to this, in what I'm calling a trap phone call, after she was released from jail on bail, the minor spoke with her, asking outright, "Why did you sexually abuse me?" To which her reply was, This phone call lasted 20 minutes. She has so far been offered 2 plea deals. She turned down the first one and is now faced with a number of years behind bars if she chooses to accept the second. If she decides to fight the charges, multiple, in court, it will begin on February 15th, 2024, where a jury of her peers will look at the evidence and pass a verdict. Until then, she remains free, while currently not allowed with children.